You think it's lust, but it's actually emptiness. You think you're driven by desire, but what's really driving you is the desperate need to fill a void so deep, so consuming, that you mistake the frantic search for connection as passion itself. Machiavelli understood this better than most. He knew that behind every seemingly powerful drive lies a more fundamental hunger, a more primal need for control, for validation, for the illusion that you matter in a world that feels increasingly indifferent to your existence. You tell yourself it's about attraction, about chemistry, about that electric pull toward another person. But look deeper. Look at the pattern. When does this hunger strike the strongest? Is it when you're feeling whole, complete, satisfied with your own company? Or is it when the silence becomes too loud, when your own thoughts become too heavy, when the mirror reflects back someone you're not sure you recognize anymore? The timing isn't coincidence. It's revelation. The emptiness announces itself through what you mistake for desire, and you've been answering its call, thinking you're following your heart when you're actually fleeing from it. Machiavelli wrote about the masks we wear, the roles we play to maintain power and position. But what he understood, what most people miss, is that we don't just wear masks for others, we wear them for ourselves. The mask of the passionate lover, the mask of the irresistible seducer, the mask of someone who chooses rather than someone who desperately needs. You've been wearing this mask so long you've forgotten it's there, forgotten that underneath it lies not confidence but terror, not desire but desperation, not strength but the kind of weakness that masquerades as power because it's too frightened to acknowledge its own vulnerability. Think about your last encounter, your last moment of what you called lust. Strip away the surface attraction, the physical sensations, the story you told yourself about wanting this person. What were you really seeking? Was it their body? Or was it the temporary extinction of your own inner emptiness? Was it their attention? Or was it the brief respite from having to face yourself in the quiet moments? Was it connection? Or was it the desperate hope that someone else's energy could fill the void where your own life force used to be? The answer is there if you're brave enough to look at it. But most people aren't brave enough because the truth is more terrifying than the lie. This is the paradox Machiavelli would have appreciated. You think you're pursuing power over another, the power to attract, to seduce, to possess. But in reality, you're the one being controlled by an emptiness that dictates your choices, your behaviors, your very sense of self-worth. You become a puppet dancing to the strings of your own inner void, and you call it freedom. You call it choice. You call it lust. But puppets don't choose their dance, and neither do you when you're being manipulated by your own unacknowledged emptiness. The emptiness doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It's subtle, insidious, wearing the costume of legitimate desire. It whispers that you need this person, that without them you'll be incomplete, that the ache you feel is romantic longing rather than the cry of a psyche that's been abandoned by its own inhabitant. You've become a stranger to yourself, estranged from your own authentic needs, your own authentic desires, your own authentic capacity for fulfillment. And in that estrangement, you mistake every external person for a potential savior, every physical attraction for a spiritual solution, every temporary high for permanent healing. But here's what Machiavelli knew about power. Real power comes from understanding the true nature of your motivations. The prince who doesn't understand why he makes certain decisions is not a prince at all. He's a slave to forces he can't even name. You've been a slave to this emptiness, calling it passion, calling it vitality, calling it anything but what it is. The absence of a relationship with your own soul. The absence of any genuine connection to your own inner landscape, your own dreams, your own capacity for self-generated joy and meaning. The people you're drawn to, they sense this emptiness even if they can't articulate it. Some are repelled by it. They feel the needy undertow beneath your confident exterior, and they flee, sensing that you're not looking for connection, but for consumption. Not for love, but for a drug. Others are attracted to it, not because they want to fill your void, but because they have their own emptiness to contend with, and misery, as they say, loves company. These are the ones who stick around. Not because you're compatible, but because you're both running from the same fundamental fear of being alone with yourselves. The connections you form aren't based on authentic attraction. They're based on mutual desperation wearing the mask of mutual desire. Two empty people hoping that together they'll somehow equal one whole person. You know this is true because of how these encounters end. If it were really about lust, about genuine physical and emotional attraction, the satisfaction would linger, the connection would deepen, the afterglow would feel like fulfillment rather than a temporary reprieve from an ongoing hunger. Instead, you find yourself almost immediately scanning for the next target, the next potential fix. The emptiness reasserts itself sometimes before you've even left their presence, sometimes while you're still tangled in their sheets. The hunger returns, often stronger than before, because you've fed it with temporary pleasure rather than addressing its real needs. And every temporary fix makes the underlying problem more desperate, more consuming. This is the cruel mathematics of using others to fill your own void. Each attempt actually enlarges the hole you're trying to fill. Each person you use as a drug to numb your inner emptiness makes you more dependent on the drug, more desperate for the next fix, more convinced that the problem is that you haven't found the right person, rather than recognizing that you're asking people to do something that only you can do for yourself. Machiavelli would have recognized this as the worst kind of political strategy, one that weakens your position with every seeming victory, one that makes you more vulnerable with each apparent conquest. The emptiness you're running from isn't your enemy. It's your teacher. It's your psyche's way of trying to tell you something crucial about the relationship you've abandoned with yourself. When did you stop being enough for your own company? When did your own thoughts, your own dreams, your own inner landscape become so unbearable that you had to seek constant external stimulation to avoid facing them? When did solitude become something to fear rather than something to cherish? The emptiness marks the spot where you left yourself behind, where you decided that your own inner world wasn't worth exploring, wasn't worth cultivating, wasn't worth the time and attention you readily saw. Give to strangers who promise to distract you from your own reality. You've been treating symptoms instead of causes, seeking connection while being fundamentally disconnected from your own authentic self. The lust you think you feel is actually the desperate reaching of a psyche trying to remember what genuine intimacy feels like. But how can you be intimate with another when you're essentially a stranger to yourself? How can you offer authentic attraction when you don't even know who you authentically are anymore? How can you recognize real desire when you've been mistaking emptiness for passion for so long that you've forgotten what genuine wanting actually feels like? Machiavelli understood. Effective strategy requires brutal honesty about your actual position, not the position you wish you held, or the position you pretend to hold. Your actual position isn't that of someone choosing partners based on genuine attraction, someone whose desires spring from a place of authentic self-knowledge and emotional health. Your actual position is that of someone so uncomfortable with their own inner reality that they'll grasp at any external distraction, call it lust, call it passion, call it love, and hope the lie becomes true through repetition and sheer force of will. The pattern reveals itself when you examine your choices without the romantic narrative you've constructed around them. Are you drawn to people who challenge you to grow, who see through your masks and love what they find underneath, who inspire you to become more authentically yourself? Or are you drawn to people who either can't see through the mask or who are too caught up in their own emptiness to look? Are you attracted to people who make you feel more like yourself, or people who help you forget yourself? The latter is easier, safer. It doesn't require you to confront the reality of who you've become, doesn't demand that you face the ways you've abandoned yourself in favor of external validation, but it also guarantees that you'll remain trapped in this cycle of mistaking emptiness for passion, need for desire, desperation for lust. It ensures that you'll keep seeking in others what you can only find in yourself. Keep asking strangers to fill a void that can only be filled from within. Keep mistaking the temporary high of external validation for the lasting satisfaction of authentic self-connection. Real desire, authentic lust, comes from overflow, not from deficit. It comes from someone who is so full of their own life force, so connected to their own authentic self, so comfortable with their own company, that they naturally want to share that energy with another. It's the attraction of someone who desires rather than needs, who chooses rather than grasps, who offers rather than takes. What you've been experiencing is the opposite. The frantic grasping of someone who hopes that consuming another person's energy, another person's attention, another person's body, will somehow replenish their own depleted stores. This is why your encounters leave you more drained than fulfilled. Why the high never lasts. Why you wake up feeling more empty than when you started. Why the temporary pleasure gives way so quickly to a hunger that's somehow even more intense than before. You're trying to extract from others what you can only generate from within. A sense of your own worth, your own completeness, your own vital life force. It's like trying to fill a bucket that has no bottom. No matter how much you pour in, it will never be enough. Because the problem isn't the amount you're pouring in, but the fact that there's nowhere for it to stay. The transformation begins when you stop running from the emptiness and start listening to what it's trying to tell you. It's not trying to torture you. It's trying to guide you back to the parts of yourself you've abandoned, the aspects of your authentic self that you've neglected in favor of external pursuits. Maybe it's your creativity, left to atrophy while you focused on getting attention rather than creating something meaningful. Maybe it's your capacity for solitude, sacrificed in favor of constant stimulation and external validation. Maybe it's your ability to dream, to hope, to believe in your own worth independent of others' attention, independent of your ability to attract and seduce and temporarily possess. Maybe it's your relationship with your own body, not as a tool for getting others' attention, but as your home, the place you live, the vessel that carries your authentic self through the world. When did you stop inhabiting your own body and start using it as a weapon of seduction? When did you stop feeling your own desires and start manufacturing desires you thought others wanted to see? When did your body become a performance rather than a lived experience? Machiavelli knew that the most dangerous enemy is the one you don't recognize as an enemy. You've been treating your emptiness as something to flee from, something to medicate with other people's attention, something to cure through external means. But it's actually pointing you toward freedom, the freedom to choose partners based on genuine compatibility rather than desperate need, the freedom to be alone without being lonely, the freedom to experience authentic desire that enhances your life rather than compensating for what's missing from it. The work isn't to immediately stop feeling attracted to people. The work is to develop enough of a relationship with yourself that you can distinguish between authentic attraction and emptiness, wearing the mask of lust. This takes time, takes practice, takes the courage to sit with uncomfortable feelings without immediately reaching for external solutions. It means learning to be present with your own inner landscape, even when it feels barren or frightening, even when it seems easier to lose yourself in someone else's body than to face whatever you find in the quiet moments. You might discover, in this process, that you've been avoiding yourself for very good reasons. Maybe there's grief there that you've never fully processed, losses you've never fully mourned, disappointments you've never fully faced. Maybe there's shame that you've been trying to escape through the validation of others' desire, through the temporary proof that you're worthy of wanting. Maybe there's anger that you've been afraid to feel, sadness that you've been afraid to experience, fear that you've been medicating with the temporary high of sexual attention. Maybe there's simply the ordinary human fear of your own mortality, your own smallness in the face of an infinite universe, your own fundamental aloneness in a world that can feel indifferent to your existence. These aren't character flaws, they're the human condition. But they become problematic when you use other people as drugs to avoid facing them. When you mistake sexual conquest for existential victory. When you try to cure your fear of death with temporary moments of feeling intensely alive in someone else's bed. The cure becomes the disease when it keeps you from developing the inner resources you need to face life's fundamental challenges with authenticity and courage. The irony is that the very thing you're seeking through these encounters, genuine connection, authentic intimacy, the feeling of being truly seen and desired for who you actually are, becomes possible only when you stop seeking it as a solution to your emptiness. When you're comfortable with your own company, when you've developed a genuine relationship with your own authentic self, when you can sit in silence without immediately reaching for your phone or your dating apps or your familiar patterns of seduction, then you can meet others from a place of choice rather than need, from overflow rather than deficit. This doesn't mean you'll never feel lonely, never long for connection, Never experienced the very human desire for touch and intimacy and the warmth of another person's body next to yours. It means you'll be able to distinguish between the ordinary human desire for companionship and the desperate hunger of someone who's using others to avoid facing themselves. The former leads to healthy relationships built on mutual attraction and genuine compatibility. The latter leads to the cycle you've been trapped in, mistaking emptiness for passion, need for desire, desperation for lust. Machiavelli would approve of this strategy. It's based on accurate assessment of your actual situation, rather than the situation you wish you were in. It requires patience, the kind of long-term thinking that builds real power, rather than the quick fixes that ultimately weaken your position. It demands that you become the kind of person who attracts others from a place of authentic strength, rather than someone who manipulates from a place of hidden weakness. Someone who has something genuine to offer, rather than someone who's desperately trying to extract what they need from others. The next time you feel that familiar pull, that surge of what you think is lust, pause. Before you reach for your phone, before you send that text, before you make that call, ask yourself what you were feeling just before the attraction struck. Were you content, fulfilled, at peace with your own company? Or were you feeling empty, restless, desperately in need of distraction from your own inner reality? Were you feeling connected to yourself? Or were you feeling like a stranger in your own skin? The answer will tell you whether you're experiencing authentic desire or emptiness wearing desire's mask. This awareness alone begins to change everything. You start to see the pattern, start to recognize the emptiness for what it is, rather than what it pretends to be. And in that recognition, you begin to reclaim your power, not the power to attract others as solutions to your problems, but the power to be genuinely attractive because you're genuinely whole. The power to choose rather than be driven, to connect rather than consume, to love rather than need. The power to offer yourself authentically rather than performing a version of yourself designed to extract what you think you need from others. The emptiness that has been controlling you, masquerading as lust, loses its power when you finally see it clearly. It becomes what it always was. Not your master, but your teacher, pointing you back toward the only person who can truly fill the void you've been trying to fill with others. That person is you, not the you that needs others to feel complete, but the you that was always complete, just waiting to be remembered, waiting to be welcomed home.